Good afternoon, and welcome to another Research in Action brought to you by the Division of Research at Florida Atlantic University. My name is Karen Scapinato. I will be today's moderator. With that, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Sabrina Sembiante. She is Associate Professor in our College of Education at FAU. And her research focuses on the instructional practices that support emergent to advanced bilingual studies, developing bilingualism, biliteracy, and academic languaging in school contexts. With that, I'm just going to turn it over to Dr. Sembiante.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for attending my session today. It is entitled How Young Multilingual Learners Connect Using Language, Visuals, and Actions for Learning and Communicating. So the focal topic for today concerns multimodality. And the question is, what is multimodality and why study multimodality in early childhood? And so by that, I mean the use of verbal resources and not just language or multiple languages, but sounds, voice tone, also using one's visual resources such as gaze, and one's actions, right? Moving around, moving your body parts, and using all of these resources to learn and to communicate. My area of interest is bilingual education and studying the ways children are developing multiple languages in their early schooling experiences. However, children's meaning-making is not limited to just language. In fact, children learn and communicate through multiple modes beyond their oral language. And their ability to communicate verbally is complemented and supported by that extraverbal communication skills, right? Their gesturing, their manipulation of objects, their movement. And so when it comes to understanding how these children are developing their communicative skills, why stop at just the two languages or more that they're developing? It's important to consider their whole linguistic repertoire that is inclusive of these other visual and actional modes. So, moreover, multimodality is a crucial way that children engage in early literacy. Starting from birth and also through everyday interactions, research shows that children develop early literacy concepts through activities such as talking, singing, reading, writing, and playing. So for children who are growing up with more than one language, their verbal, their visual, their actional resources help to validate their learning. It also supports that creative knowledge construction, and it maximizes these children's potential for communication. So we're trying to push to move beyond just examining children's oral language production, which is actually just one single mode of communication. And we want to push towards acknowledging the multimodal practices that may help us better understand the ways that these children are developing content knowledge and also learning to communicate as a whole. There are also pressures for school readiness for kindergarten, which have impacted curricula decision-making in preschools. These stem from Common Core initiatives and the testing that is aligned to those initiatives. And these pressures promote more seat work in preschool, more teacher-led and more scripted instruction that is designed to try and prepare students, these children, for the requirements of kindergarten. But those pressures also encroach on the free choice activities, those activities that are child-led, that are playful and exploratory opportunities that are so crucial to children's early development. And so understanding more about children's multimodal practices in free choice activities and how these support children's learning helps to push back on those harmful initiatives. And then lastly, currently, and as you would expect, there is a predominance of research on language in early childhood rather than studies that investigate how children learn via nonverbal modes. And although the body of research on multimodality in early childhood is growing, there's actually relatively few studies on children exploring this topic with children who are emerging as bilingual, right? Who are learning different languages more than English. And so it's really interesting to think about multimodality for these children who also have at their disposal this unique capacity to make meaning across two or more languages at the same time. So to further our understanding of this particular population with regard to multimodality and thinking about their learning of the two or more languages, we look at, we explore, we investigate those verbal, visual, and actional resources in dual language preschools. So in the last 4 years of focusing on this topic, my colleagues and I have conducted approximately 8 studies looking at children's and teachers' multimodal practices. And we do this across typical preschool activities. So for children, we've looked at their multimodality as supporting their show and tell presentations. Also how that multimodality supports their interactions in dramatic play and how it allows them to carry out their purposes in block play. We've also looked at teachers' multimodal practices and how these support children's show and tell activity, as well as how teachers use these to facilitate morning circle activity. And I'll be sharing with you some of our data and findings as I move forward in this presentation. Okay, so the larger research project was a 2-year ethnography of a Spanish-English dual language preschool program. This program was situated in a multilingual, multicultural community in the Southeast United States. Our goal was to investigate the language and literacy practices of the emergent bilingual children and the teachers as they engaged in those various preschool activities. And we did this through naturalistic observation. So in other words, our intention was never to intervene or change the practices that were occurring in the classroom. We were just very interested in seeing what those practices were. And then the program's language distribution policy, because it was a dual language program, was to alternate Spanish and English each week so that the language of instruction for the major activities would be carried out in one of those languages and then would switch each week. So some of the typical preschool activities that we looked at included morning circle. And morning circle was the first activity of the day. You can see that children and teachers are sitting around a circle in a large group space. And this activity featured lots of routines where children would sing welcome songs and morning songs. They would also greet one another. They would listen and respond to each other's news. And as the last part of morning circle, they would, as a group, review the day, the month, the year, and they would write out a sentence that represented the day's events and go through some of the literacy concepts that way as well. That took about 20 to 30 minutes every morning. Show and tell happened once a week, and this is where children were invited to bring an object from home. They would either sit in a circle, or as you can see in that picture, they would sit as an audience facing the presenter. And the presenter would then talk to their peers about the object. The teacher would be there to facilitate by asking questions and sort of pushing the presentation along. And this would last anywhere between 25 to 65 minutes. The third setting was dramatic play. And this is one of the choices children could make in this 45-minute free choice time that happened every day in the preschool classroom. And as you can see in that picture, the dramatic play area was designed to represent different areas of the home. You can see the kitchen, there's an oven, there's a fridge, there's a cabinet, there's also a closet, a dining area with the table, and off camera, there's actually a laundry area as well. And then the last area was block play. Block play was another choice that children could make during that 45-minute free choice time. So for example, they could either choose to do dramatic play or block play. And in block play, children went to this open space area. They were given these proportional wooden blocks, which they could then choose to build to their liking and sort of support their play that way. And in that setting, children were only paired with two others at a maximum. So we investigated 3 mixed age classrooms. These classrooms had 19 to 24 children in each class. Children were between the ages of 3 and 11 months and 5 years, 3 years and 11 months and 5 years and 7 months at the time of data collection. So you can see that the mixed age, they're all grouped together in the same classroom. And over the 2 years, we documented a total of 98 students across these 3 classrooms, because some of them were coming in, were new to the classroom, and some of them were leaving to head to kindergarten. The children reflected the community's diversity in terms of their cultural, ethnic, linguistic backgrounds. And I provided you some information out of some of the children from the research project. You can see that their primary home languages included Spanish, but also Portuguese, English, Arabic, and French. So in terms of the teachers, 2 teachers led each preschool classroom. One modeled English and the other Spanish, as I described before. This meant that each week, all of the major activities would be in Spanish, led by the Spanish model teacher. And then in the next week, the English model teacher would be the lead teacher and run all of the activities in English. And in those 2 time periods, the co-teacher would always maintain her language. So let's say it's Spanish week, the co-teacher, who's the English language model, would always maintain English and interact using English even during that week. And even though teachers were asked to stay within their languages that they were modeling, children were very free to choose whatever language that they wanted to interact in. They could be fluid. They could use English or Spanish or even code switch in between as needed. And I've given you some demographic information about the teachers there. Okay, so we collected video recordings and field notes of the full day activities for each of the 3 classrooms, at least once per week during the academic year over the 2-year research period. And when analyzing the data, we used video coding software to code the videos for the modes that the teachers and the children were using to support their activities in each of those, in block play, dramatic play, etc. We code moment to moment, taking into account the context and the purposes. So it's quite a micro level of analysis. For example, a 20-minute video would take upwards of 4 to 5 hours to code because we are so focused on the moment to moment and interactions. We also transcribed teachers and children's speech as necessary, and we triangulated that data with the field notes that we took during data collection. So in our work, we've developed a multimodal coding framework that helps us look for the particular modes that we're coding for, and we break it up as follows. We have verbal modes, which we look at whether children or teachers are using one language, which would be monolingual languaging, or if they're varying their languages, if they're code switching, this would be encompassed by translanguaging, or if they are understanding receptively one language and choosing to use another in response, which is also another form of translanguaging. We also looked verbally at sound verbalizations, like the noises that children might make to accompany their movement, as well as their voice intonation, rhythm and stress that would indicate other forms of meaning, and looking at singing as well. Visually, we coded gaze, and we also looked at the disembodied modes, such as print and images that would be situated around the classroom that children might interact in as they're in the different activities. And lastly, we looked at actional modes, such as manipulation of objects, right? Gesturing, and there's 2 forms. So children could either gesture iconically like this, meaning okay, or they might be more metaphorical, like in dramatic play. They might use a movement like this to show that they're putting salt on food. We looked at facial expressions, also at pointing, the way that they moved their body, and when they moved from area to area, more globally in the classroom. So I'm going to show you the first clip, and it comes from dramatic play, and it features Aaron. Aaron is the child that is holding the doll, and we're going to see how Aaron recruits his modes and the objects in dramatic play to personalize his play. So he actually has a pretty complex play going on. He is taking 2 roles at the same time. He is acting as the caretaker to the baby, and he's also acting as the baby itself. And so I'm going to play this clip for you a little bit, and you're going to see how he plays out in those 2 roles and the modes that he engages to do that. So we noticed that Aaron, in his caretaker role, we see him looking at and manipulating the baby doll, making sure that it's dressed properly. We also see him placing the doll in the high chair. Then, as he switches in between the two different roles, as he takes on that baby role, we notice him use sound verbalizations. He starts to cry in different ways in the storyline. He's crying when the child falls through the high chair. And then he also cries when he places, as in his caretaker role, he places the food in front of the baby. And lastly, we notice that in his role as baby, he grabs the fish and throws it at a peer, right? And so here, what's really interesting is that by throwing that object at the peer, he's drawing his peer's attention to his storyline. It's also the moment in time where he offers his first sort of verbal speech piece in this clip, where he says, "El bebé throwed it, el bebé." And so here we see the use of two languages, right? Spanish, el bebé, being the label for the baby, and then throwed it in English. So he's trans-languaging there. And he's labeling that doll for the purposes of his peer who can understand him, that it's el bebé, right? And he's blaming it on his peer. So we see that Aaron is very deliberate and strategic with the modes that he uses to enact those two roles and to differentiate between them, and also how he recruits that object and uses it to draw his peer's attention to his storyline and to his play. So the next clip I'm going to show you is from Show and Tell. And in this clip, we're going to see how children combine their modes to support their presentation purposes. And in our previous work in Show and Tell, we found that children's presentations take on three different purposes. One is to present the physical, the attributes of the object, right? Describe the object and what it looks like. A second type of presentation is to showcase how to use the object. And the third is to tell a story that is related to the object. And when we conducted a follow-up study to see how children were moving, right, using their ulterior modes in support of these presentations, we found differences in the ways that they were doing so across these three. So an example is gaze, for example. In the first, where the child is describing the physical attributes, their gaze is primarily at the object. Then when we see the child presenting how to use the object, we see the child's gaze shift between the audience and the object. And then when presenting the story, when telling the story that's related to the object, the child primarily gazes at the audience. And we saw similar patterns with other modes, such as manipulations of objects and spatial movement. They all vary depending on the purpose of the child's presentation. So I'm going to show you an example here of Oliver. Oliver has brought his motorized car to Show and Tell, to present to his peers. And we're going to see him showcase how to use the motorized car by shaking it. And his interaction with this peer over here, who is having a hard time getting the car to move. So I'd like you to pay attention to the ways that Oliver supports and scaffolds his peer's ability to make the motorized car move.
Too loud. Oh, that's awesome! Yay! Can I do it?
Déjame a ver, te lo voy a ver.
Don't do it too hard.
No lo hagas tan... Muy bien, Oliver.
So Oliver does several things, right? Extra verbally here to support everybody's understanding about how to use the car. He shakes it, and then it transfers to his peer. But also in shaking it, he's modeling to everybody how to do that. And then he also, when the other child is having difficulty sending it back, he both models shake it and uses that command, shake it, to reinforce that. Also, when the child is able to do it correctly the first time, we see him clapping. So this is also an extra verbal reinforcement of the activity. And then in trying to instruct the peer in how to do it properly, he says, don't do it too hard. We see him shake his head from side to side. Also, what's really interesting here is that this type of object, because it's motorized and it's able to, it's a nice object that supports this interaction between these two children. Also, Oliver chooses to stay in place. Notice how he never moves throughout the whole entire interaction, as he's trying to direct his friend in how to send the car back. And this was intentional in his part, knowing that he was sort of supporting his peer in how to send it back. And so in cases like this, where we have a child who's much younger than Oliver and who's at a different stage of English proficiency than Oliver is, Oliver uses his other modes to interact and to have the child be able to be successful in sending the motorized car back. Okay, so we have another clip from Show and Tell. And now we are seeing Dwight. Dwight is an English-speaking child. He comes from an English-speaking family. So he is learning Spanish through his exposure to Spanish in this dual language classroom. Dwight is showcasing his pirate garb. He's brought a hat, he's brought a sword, and a ring. And he's participating in the Spanish Show and Tell. And you're gonna see how, even though he is unable to respond in Spanish, he uses all of his other modes to showcase that he's participating and engaging with the teacher. So we see Dwight putting on, she says, "Póntelos," put it on in Spanish, and he follows suit, showing that he's understood. That's an example of translanguaging. So even though he's not verbally using Spanish, his ability to understand is still a form of learning and developing Spanish language use. So Dwight doesn't answer there. And he's shook his head. He's shook his head, indicating that he answered the question wrong because he is a pirate. So he's showing that he doesn't understand. So here, what's happened is that the teacher's asked in Spanish, what do pirates do? Oh, I'm so sorry. Hold on. Am I sharing my, I'm sorry. Technical glitch. Okay. So she asks, ¿Y qué hacen los piratas? What do the pirates do? And he chooses to answer in English, right? That they play with swords. And as he does so, he shows his sword to the teacher in support of that answer.
Where did you get it from?
And he's holding it out to her. And she, in trying to support his Spanish learning, recast that in Spanish. The other thing I want to point out here is that the teacher also uses some verbal modes that are in addition to speech to help Dwight understand the Spanish that she's using. So if we pay attention to the intonation of her voice when she goes pirata, right? Let me bring it there. So her intonation is pirata, and then she's going to repeat the intonation when she's saying the word in English. So pirata, a pirate. So the use of the same intonation pattern for the two different words is another nice way that she reinforces the fact that they are translations of each other without explicitly having to say it. She does the same thing when she recasts his they play with swords. When he says that, she recasts it in Spanish and she copies the intonation pattern that he uses. So the last point that I wanted to make here is that for children like Dwight, who come in with one of the languages of the program and are still developing their language proficiency in the other, the strategic use of their modes is crucial to help them engage and participate in the activities despite their developing language proficiency. It also gives them the options of choosing when they're not comfortable yet to productively use Spanish, that they have these other options of communicating at their fingertips, right? Through visuals, through actions, and other forms of verbal modes. Okay, so now we get to block play. And in block play, we're seeing children create patterns with their modes that does two things for them. It helps propel their collaboration, work together towards a common goal, and it also helps push their exploration. And in this case, in this clip, these two children are exploring the idea of cause and effect by using cars up a ramp. So as you watch this clip, I want you to notice how children are creating a pattern around play, and then based on that pattern, they expand and enhance that play, both verbally and through embodiment. And I'll talk us through as we watch. So you notice this is the pattern. This is the base pattern that we're going to see over and over again, where the child has taken the toy, moves it towards the bottom of the ramp, and uses the and then when they say the word go, that's when they time their movement of the car up the ramp and see the effect of the car crashing. Now we're starting to see additions of a sound verbalization, which is like the kaboom, and we'll see different options of those to be used in time with the effect, right? And to capture the effect of the car. So notice how now the verbal has expanded. We went from and go to 1 and 2 and 3, kaboom, right? So we see verbal enhancement there. They're still using that one ramp. Now we notice that Joaquin has moved to a bigger ramp and he's changing the direction in which the car is going. Still using the same 1, 2, 3, room.
2, 3, room. 1, 2, 3.
So notice now that also that pattern of 1, 2, 3 and boom allows each of them to collaborate, right? They're taking turns doing the same patterned routine, but they're also exploring different ways of using the ramp. So if you just noticed, Joaquin went from the bottom of the ramp up the ramp, whereas Elvis did, whereas Joaquin went towards the bottom. Also notice how Joaquin has chosen 2 cars now. So before they were using 1 car, now he's chosen 2. So they're continuing to expand on this cause and effect of the ramp of the car up or down the ramp.
1, 2, 3, crash.
And we see a new sound verbalization there, crash. That's new. We've seen kaboom before. So now what happens is that the teacher enters into the space and she asks, show me, explain to me what you are doing. And this is a great opportunity for the children to describe to her what they've been doing. And what you'll notice is that even though Joaquin, who is the little boy in the red, chooses to describe it verbally, we'll see Elvis, who is the little boy in the gray, expand on that and choose to answer the teacher by also showing what they've been doing.
Just trying to do the cars and race them down.
So he says, just trying to do the cars and race them down. That's the linguistic description. And watch.
Race them down like this.
So, and then you see Elvis acting out that same pattern that they've been playing along with, which has actually been ratcheted up and enhanced the whole entire time. And here, what these children are doing is that they're understanding and exploring the idea of gravity and the idea of cause and effect. And it's not shown in this clip, but as the conversation between the teacher and the children continues, they get to it becomes more solidified, that idea of cause and effect, and the fact that that kaboom and crash being connected to the effect, and then the children pausing between the two. So lots of complexity here if you actually pay attention to the modes that children are using. And and also the way that it allows them to collaborate together and take turns toward that common goal. Okay, so we're going to go to morning circle now, and now we're going to shift our attention from children to teachers. So in this morning circle activity, we see three adults. We see the lead teacher, who is the Spanish language model, and she's going to lead the song in Spanish. To her left, we see the English model teacher, and actually this teacher does not understand Spanish, does not speak Spanish, and that has implications for how this activity goes. And then we also see a parent in this circle, and she's sitting with her child, and she's new to the classroom. She's choosing to participate in this morning circle, but she's not often there. So this is a new activity to her. So as I play this clip, I'd love you to look at the ways in which the lead teacher is moving as she sings the song. I'd like you to notice that the co-teacher is not singing along with her because she doesn't know Spanish, and the parent is also not singing along. And so let's look at how the embodiment seems to bring them all together.
Araña, pequeña araña, a tu voz se subió, vino la lluvia y se la llevó, salió el sol y todo lo secó, y la pequeña araña de nuevo se subió.
Okay, so here what we notice is that the pairing the movements in the song with the words of the song is meant to help scaffold children's vocabulary and phrasal learning in Spanish, but it's also acting as a support for the two other adults in the activity. In terms of the co-teacher who is unable to sing along, the co-teacher is also looking from time to time at the lead teacher in order to follow along with the song, right? And to mirror her movements and to do it together as a group. We see the same thing happening with the parent who's unfamiliar with the song. And so by looking at the lead teacher, she's able to follow along. And they, despite the language barriers going on and despite the unfamiliarity of the parent, they are still able to build this classroom community through these common actions. So here, what's really important is that the multimodality is being used as a bridge for those new to the language and also new to the activity. And it's not just for children, but it also brings together the adults in the room. And then this is the last clip I'm going to share with you today. It's also from Morning Circle. And here we're seeing that teachers model different behavior norms for different activities. So in preschool classrooms, children are not just learning about numeracy and literacy, but they're also learning about how to behave in the different activities as part of that classroom. So we saw in the sing-along, in the Morning Circle portion of singing, we see teachers encouraging synchronistic movement, bodily movement. They encourage loud sounds, right? All of that is appropriate behavior, and they do that by mirroring each other. The types of behaviors that teachers are modeling here are very different. So they model silence and turn-taking. They also ask children to sit appropriately. You can see that the children are have their legs crossed. There's a saying, crisscross applesauce for that. And they also ask children to desist from moving around or touching each other or lying on the floor, or any other behaviors that disrupt that norm of listening to the teacher who's discussing the sentence of the day there. So the other part that I want to point your attention to is the co-teacher in this clip. You're going to notice that she's going to help regroup the class who are rather distracted at this point in Morning Circle.
And what symbol do we use when we're happy? What symbol do we use when we're happy?
So at this point, you can see that the children, most of them are not looking at the lead teacher. They're not answering. They seem to be somewhat distracted. And so the co-teacher is going to enter in now. And she is going to use the actional modes, which are inherent to children, to try and recapture their attention. Notice how she also points back to the lead teacher. By pointing, she's trying to reorient children's attention, which she's now captured through that bodily movement, reorient back to the lead teacher, who then continues.
So what did I put at the end of the sentence?
Okay, what's interesting to note here is that basically, if we look at the lead teacher's questioning at the beginning, there is sort of a point where there was miscommunication, or it was unfamiliar to students, right? She's asking, what symbol do we use when we're happy? And she's written the sentence, today we will look at clouds, which is the day's events. And what she's looking for answer-wise is an exclamation point. That's what she wants to put at the end. That's a symbol she wants to put at the end of the sentence. But that question is too abstract for children who don't really know what the options are for answering, and are also disengaged at that point. So here, by thinking about the modes that children use to make meaning themselves, right, that they're attracted to, if we think visually,
And what symbol do we use when we're happy?
if she had used a poster like this that showcases the different symbol options that are available to place at the end of a sentence, that is one way that she could have scaffolded this question that's pretty abstract for children. And another way, knowing that children respond to bodily movements, like the co-teacher used, she could have asked children to raise their hands. Who wants to come up and point to which symbol we need at the end of the sentence, right? Raise your hands, and then one of the children would be able to come up and point. And so just being very cognizant of all of the different modes at our disposal and being strategic and harnessing them to increase engagement on children's part. So what have we learned? Basically, that children are very, very strategic and intentional when they use their modes, and they do so to support their communication purposes and show and tell. We saw how it helped to enhance the different storylines, the two concomitant storylines in dramatic play, and also the ratcheting that complex idea of cause and effect in block play. We saw that in this mixed age classroom where we have different languages, backgrounds, and proficiencies, children use those modes to interact with each other and to showcase to teachers when they comprehend, even if they choose not to use speech in particular. When we think about teachers, we notice that multimodal practices help to build the community when we have new members come into the classroom, or members who are still learning the languages or are unable to understand the other language in this dual language program. That multimodal practice was so important because it acted as the sole bridge between the adults in the classroom in that morning circle activity that we saw. And it also helps to bolster the classroom culture. So implicitly, when teachers are modeling behaviors appropriate for morning circle versus block play, using those actional visual modes are very important to showcase how to do that. And lastly, multimodal practices definitely level the communication playing field in this classroom, which has young learners of different ages, languages, and proficiencies, and even among the teachers who are the different language models. So my last point here is, what does this mean for practitioners and parents of young multilingual learners? What can this help us understand for instruction and language learning? The first part is that in this early childhood stage, we have to be very careful to recognize when children are in a listening period, which is actually a highly active learning period. They may not choose to use productive language, right, in English or Spanish. What they may do is choose to use other modes to signal their comprehension and engagement in these activities. And it's really important for us as parents and practitioners to recognize and respect those choices, and also to use those modes ourselves when we're trying to scaffold for them. Objects were very important. We saw them in dramatic play and then show and tell. What we can see is that objects change the types of interaction practices of children, and they stimulate different uses of modes for those children. So we want to choose objects that invite peer interaction, that encompass different modalities like sound, light, and movement, and vary them through in the environment from time to time. And as I sort of said before, and as we saw in that last morning circle clip, where the teacher could have used a chart of symbols to support her question, we want to be mindful of which modes we can use to support and scaffold the verbal language that we use as parents and teachers. Tone is very effective to do this. So whenever we want to try and indicate to children that we are translating or recasting something that was said in English into the target language, we can use the same tone and match tone to signal that. That's one way that we saw teachers using it. And then the last point, and this goes back to my first point in the introduction, we definitely need to treat these child-led activities as sacred and protect extended time in these settings, in dramatic play, in block play, because we're seeing children enhance their ideas about the world through their own explorations. And these ideas are very complex, right? Think about the two storylines that Aaron was playing with in dramatic play. Think about the cause and effect that Elvis and Joaquin in block play were playing around with and showcasing. So it's looking at the multimodal practices reveals this level of complexity that we would miss if we only focus on the verbal language piece. Here are the supporting publications for the information that I shared with you today. There are some very recent presentations that we've done as well that are manuscripts in progress, so look out for those soon. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. Very interesting topic. Just as a reminder, if you want to would like to ask a question, please type it in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we go through them as they come in. I had a question actually. So with all your observations, do you utilize those to train teachers to use your multimodular activities more efficiently, more effectively?
Yes, and so when we entered into that research project, we were trying to also support the center. That dual language center is really well known for its practices. It's kind of a leading program that is doing great things for children, and so we wanted to support their endeavors that way. So what we would do is we would create PDs, PD days. We would do some workshops, and we would show teachers clips of themselves. And we'd look at the practices that were beneficial. We preferred to focus on what teachers did right, rather than call out sort of, as I did in that last example where I just talked about what the teacher could have done better with showing the symbols on a chart. Mm-hmm. We did less of that because we really did want to encourage and promote what teachers were doing well.
Thanks. So one of the questions here is whether there are any significant differences in communication strategies across student development stages, the younger versus older preschoolers, and students and teachers' genders, mm-hmm. predominant language or race? That's a really interesting question.
Yeah, so and definitely the work to this date has pushed us to think about the significant differences. Of course, this research project was qualitative in nature. As I described it, it was observational based, naturalistic. We placed the cameras in the classroom and sort of stepped back and took notes and didn't interfere at all. And the reason we started with that exploratory style of study is just to understand what the practices look like. So now, as we've definitely conducted, at least 8 studies have come from this. We're definitely interested in moving on and using this type of information and the frameworks that we've developed from them. As I showed you, that multimodal framework, that's developed from the grounded practices. And so using that to try and think about how we can convert or recollect data quantitatively for quantitative purposes to understand significant differences across ages and genders, for sure. So, very interesting questions, and I joined that person in being interested in that. And a study to this degree, in terms of, it was a long time, lots of data. I think I put there like 300 hours of video. Is a nice foundational base to then move forward and apply for grants where we can do some statistical quantitative explorations.
Great. There is an interest in the publication slide that you showed at the end of your presentation. Can you put that up one more time? Somebody would like to take note of that. And while that's up there, I'm going to ask you another question here. So you showed that example of that little boy who was dressed up as a pirate, and the teacher was communicating with him in Spanish, and he had nonverbal answers or would answer in English. Is that because, but he seemed to understand the Spanish cues from the teacher, right? So as you are developing your language skills, do you understand before you speak, or is that just coincidental?
No, that's correct. That's true. So the first sort of step in that context, in that classroom, is that children like Dwight, who come in with very little or no Spanish in his experience up to that point in the program, come in and start to learn, make associations between the movements, the vocabulary that teachers are using, with peers, and start to receptively understand Spanish. There is that period where they are actively listening and learning to understand some of the vocabulary in Spanish. And then towards the end of their time in that classroom, and it may not even be the first year, but maybe in the second year, as they're in an extended time in that classroom where they're hearing Spanish and English, they may then start to show use of Spanish, beginning with some vocabulary terms, and then later on, as they're closer to the age where they would move to kindergarten, actually come out with longer pieces of phrases, syntax that's in Spanish. If you remember in the dramatic play clip, Aaron, who was the child playing with the doll, named the doll El Bebé. I pointed that out when I showed it. So what's also very common with children is that they learn labels of items in one language or another. So in his mind, and also his peer was sort of had a balanced Spanish-English proficiency like him in that setting. So that also has a role in it. But he labels the child, the doll, El Bebé, throat it, El Bebé. And so we also see that happening where children just make associations. This item is named this and it might be a Spanish term. And then as they progress, they start to understand that all objects would have labels in both English and Spanish as they move through the trajectory.
Very interesting. So in the beginning, when they learn languages and maybe 2 languages, they don't distinguish what language they're just associating whatever, whether it's el bebé or a baby. That's what they're associating with it, not distinguishing that it's one language versus another.
Yeah, they may not at the beginning. And that is part of it's part of the decision making that went into that center, where they chose to use Spanish for 1 week and English for the next week. And that decision is kind of arbitrary. I will tell you, there's not much research to really support the choice of 1 week versus 2 weeks versus 2 days, right, in alternating. But definitely as children get used to that routine of Spanish and then English, they do make those associations quite quickly, understanding that, oh, we're using Spanish now, right? And then next week we're using English, and then they can differentiate. And that idea that one object contains 2 labels, right? One in Spanish and one in English, meaning the same thing. That's a really important literacy concept that pushes children along the early literacy continuum progression. And that's actually in quantitative research, that idea, that metalinguistic idea, has been shown to enhance children's ability to perform academically at a later stage.
Very interesting. I noticed you're speaking about 1 week English, one week Spanish. I noticed in the play with Elvis and the other child with the cars, that when the teacher came and the teacher asked the question in Spanish, and both boys answered in English. Yes. Do they just not realize that what language they're in? That's just the first thing that comes to mind, or is there actually a purpose behind it? In a sense.
Yeah, so there's I'd say there's predominantly 2 things going on there. That was Spanish week because the teacher the teacher is leading the activity in Spanish. But as I had mentioned before, children had the option of using whatever language they wanted to, regardless of the week. Language was just promoted holistically. And so we did see, as part of our research, that children, especially as they got older, and that was the case with both Joaquin and Elvis, those two children in that clip, they were both older. That was their last year in the center before moving to kindergarten. Children would opt to use English more often than Spanish. And we felt that was coming from the experiences that they might have in the community, where English is by and large everywhere. And Spanish suffers from, having the same sort of being represented in the community as much. So that was one point. But we do have videos of both of those children translanguaging in different activities. And from what we've been able to see, of course, it's qualitative, so it's not generalizable, and it's not meant to be generalizable. What we've noticed is that children do seem to choose Spanish depending on the peer that they're playing with. In one of the other dramatic play papers that we have, it's not multimodal, it's just focused on the translanguaging happening in dramatic play. We've noticed how a child who was we call a balanced bilingual, which they are comfortable in both English and Spanish at that point, varies their choice of using Spanish or English depending on the peer, the language preference of the peer that they're paired with in dramatic play. And that's in one of our other papers as well. Always with the same colleagues. So it's always Bengochea, myself, and Gort. And we vary the order.
Very interesting. Let me go over a couple more of our attendance questions here. Does dual language learning impact language progress?
Yes, it does. It does so longitudinally, though. So if you were to assess these children, and this is based on other research, what is probably going to come out of that testing is you're going to find that children who are emergent bilingual don't do as well in English or Spanish as their monolingual English or monolingual Spanish peer. Okay, that's at this point. This is at this age. But remember that the child is learning language, vocabulary, syntax in both of those languages. And so if you put all of that knowledge together, it's equivalent, we could say. With time, as children are continually exposed to and put in environments where that bilingualism is supported, they will get to a point, and it's later on, it's probably around 2nd or 3rd grade, that their knowledge in English and in Spanish matches or surpasses their monolingual peer. So the answer is yes. It's not immediate. It takes time for that development to occur.
Thank you. There's another question here. By the end of the school year, what is the level of fluency by the native English speaker and for the native Spanish speaker?
Mm-hmm. So in this particular program, these children, this program is a showcase for dual language preschool programs in the area. And these children were tested to be, their English proficiency tested to be equal to their two monolingual peers. Their Spanish proficiency was a little bit lower, but definitely in being a part of this program did not put them at risk at all, or at a deficit in comparison to their monolingual peers as they moved into kindergarten. I don't know if I answered that, if there was anything else I need to answer there.
Okay, we're coming up on the hour, but I'm going to have at least one more question here. And, I don't know if that was the answer to the question, but if you have any more questions for Dr. Sembiante or would like a follow-up, please feel free to either contact us or contact her directly. We can also get you in touch. So if that wasn't, your questions that are completely answered, feel free to contact us. Okay, what did parent involvement look like for this type of classroom? And did parents get information of what their children were learning about the vocabulary or language learning that occurred?
Yes, so parents were very, very much invited into this classroom in different ways. So we would see parents engage in morning circle activities or other types of activities like we did in that clip. We would also, teachers asked parents to volunteer and come and read to children during read aloud time. So we saw that. We also had interesting, and there is evidence of this in one of the papers to do with dramatic play. We had a father make an example of an airplane using cardboard boxes. And so, with taped together cardboard boxes to look like the inside of a plane, with the plane windows, and then there were seats placed in the plane. And so for a period of time, it was around a month and a half, dramatic play was actually an airport and a plane. And teachers set up a little portal that children could go through with their luggages. There was luggage, and then they could enact that in dramatic play. And that was from a parent, a father who did that. So ways of interacting like that were very much welcome by to parents. Also, the school viewed parents as another resource, Spanish language in particular resource, where they could support and reinforce the Spanish language for children, because it was at a sort of used to a lesser degree once children exited out of the school, right? Every day when they left the school, English would be everywhere at that point. And then as part of that, parents were definitely in the know about the curriculum, were invited at any point to, be part of the classroom.
Very cool. I like the that example that you gave on the airplane. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it was very cool. Very, very cool to study as well.
Yeah, it obviously requires a bit more, not just interaction, a bit more resources as well, right? If you do more than just the seated, busy work, if you like, right, or seated activities, definitely also more imagination, I would think. Okay, we are at the hour. I know we have a couple of more questions. We will have Dr. Sembiante answer those offline, and then post the answers on our website together with a recording of today's presentation. So you can find that on our website, Division of Research at FAU, Research in Action. If you Google that, you should be able to find it. If not, please feel free to contact us for any additional questions or any additional information you need. With that, thank you very much, Dr. Sembiante. It was a pleasure having you. And thanks everybody for coming. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.